Once, 60 million bison thundered across North America. By 1900, fewer than 1,000 remained. Extinction wasn't just possible, it seemed inevitable. The people who saved them were an unlikely group. A cattle baron's homesick wife, a big game hunting president, a Comanche chief navigating the collapse of his world, and a taxidermist who had personally killed some of the last bison on Earth. None of them should have been on the same side, but they were. And their effort came down to 15 animals, loaded onto a Wells Fargo train in New York City, and shipped 1,800 miles west to Oklahoma. It would become the first intentional wildlife restoration in American history. And it all began here in the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge. To understand what was at stake, you have to understand what the Great Plains once were. In 1805, Lewis and Clark rode to the top of a hill and counted 20,000 bison in a single valley. For thousands of years, bison dominated the continent from Canada to Mexico. Pronghorn raced across open grasslands, wolves shadowed the herds, elk moved through river valleys, coyotes called across the prairie at night. Early explorers described the plains as overflowing with life, more like the Serengeti than the America we recognize today. For the native people of the plains, the Lakota, the Comanche, the Blackfoot, and many others, the buffalo was not simply a resource, it was everything. Food, clothing, tools, shelter. Entire cultures, ceremonies, stories, and spiritual traditions revolved around the animal. The United States government understood this. The American West was not settled after the buffalo disappeared. The buffalo disappeared so it could be settled. Armies of hunters in warlike fashion spread across the plains, slaughtering as many animals as possible. The goal was simple: starve the tribes, break their resistance. And it worked. Tribes that had never needed government support suddenly depended on it. Nations that had resisted for generations were forced onto reservations. Disease spread, starvation followed. Sitting Bull, the great Lakota chief, described the moment the buffalo disappeared. A cold wind blew across the prairie when the last buffalo fell, a death wind for my people. And when the last bison fell, the bone pickers came. Entrepreneurs gathered the bones by the ton and shipped them east, where they were used in industrial processes. In some places, bone pickers made more money than the meat hunters ever had. By 1889, the Smithsonian's chief taxidermist, William Hornaday, tried to count how many buffalo were still left. His estimate shocked the country. Just 541 bison remained in the United States, 256 in zoos, about 200 in Yellowstone, and only about 85 still truly wild. Here's where the story gets complicated. The people who saved the bison were not heroes. Not exactly. After doing his bison census, William Hornaday traveled west to collect specimens for a museum display. He killed 23 of them, even though he knew they were almost extinct. I mean, he's the guy that just made this map. But something changed out there on those plains. Hornaday spent 2 months traveling thousands of miles just to find enough bison to kill 20 animals. Just 80 years earlier, the bison were so thick, Lewis and Clark had to throw stones at them to shoo them out of the way. Hornaday came back deeply unsettled. He began pushing the Smithsonian, and eventually Congress, to do something. Breed the survivors, protect them, and create reserves where they could recover. He wasn't alone. Before he was president, Theodore Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell had founded the Boone and Crockett Club, a hunting organization dedicated to protecting big game animals. They didn't want to stop hunting, they wanted something left to hunt. Another unlikely figure was Charles Goodnight. Goodnight had fought native tribes and slaughtered bison so his cattle could graze the Texas plains, but he kept a small herd alive on his ranch in Palo Duro Canyon, not out of conservation, but because his wife, Molly, was lonely. Her nearest neighbor was 70 miles away, and she wanted a few buffalo calves as companions. That small herd, kept for reasons no one could have predicted, would become one of the most important genetic sources of the species' survival. These were the people who saved the buffalo. Complicated, flawed, but they were also the ones who acted when almost no one else did. Meanwhile, in Indian Territory, in what would later become Oklahoma, another leader was navigating an impossible world. Quanah Parker was chief of the Comanche, the last of the Great Plains tribes to surrender to the United States. His father was a Comanche war leader. His mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, had been captured as a child and raised among the Comanche. Quanah lived between two worlds. He was an original code switcher. He wore braids and lived in a teepee, but he also negotiated with politicians, hosted cattle barons, and rode in Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in 1905. He understood that survival for his people required something difficult: adaptation. Shortly after his inauguration, Roosevelt traveled to southwest Oklahoma on a hunting trip. For several days, they hunted together in the rugged hills of the region. And during that visit, Parker helped convince Roosevelt that the nearby mountains would be the perfect place for a new wildlife preserve. Ancient granite peaks rising from the southern plains, remote, rugged, with water, shelter, and native grass. On June 2, 1905, Roosevelt signed an executive order creating the Wichita Forest and Game Preserve. More than 60,000 acres set aside for large wildlife. The stage was set. In 1907, the taxidermist turned conservationist, William Hornaday, had assembled a small herd, carefully bred at the Bronx Zoo from animals gathered from Goodnight's Texas Ranch and a handful of other survivors. They were loaded into wooden crates, the kind used to ship thoroughbred horses, and placed onto a Wells Fargo freight train in New York City, 1,858 miles to Oklahoma. Think about what that journey meant. A generation earlier, settlers had ridden trains west to slaughter buffalo by the millions. Hides and bones were loaded onto those same rail lines and shipped back east for industry. Now, for the first time in history, the direction had reversed. 15 animals, survivors of a species that had once numbered in the tens of millions, were riding a train back to the Great Plains. 7 days later, the train arrived in Cache, Oklahoma. From there, the animals were hauled 12 miles by wagon through the mountain passes into the heart of the Wichita Mountains. Within 2 months, 2 calves were born. Within 6 years, the herd had doubled. It was the first intentional wildlife restoration effort in North American history. Today, there are roughly 430,000 bison in North America, a remarkable comeback for a species that once tiptoed on the edge of extinction. But the story isn't as simple as it sounds. Fewer than 10% of those animals roam in truly wild, free-moving herds. Ecologically speaking, the buffalo is still only a shadow of what it once was. Bison are not just another grazing animal, they are ecosystem engineers. Their grazing stimulates new plant growth. Their wallowing creates small basins that hold water and shelter insects. Birds, grasses, an entire food web evolved alongside the moving herds. When the bison disappeared, much of that living system disappeared with them. The preservation of the buffalo often came at the expense of the Indian tribes. As the government made more and more game reserves, they often took the land from the Native Americans. The land that became the Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge was originally taken from the Kiowa and Comanche through federal allotment. That history does not disappear simply because the buffalo returned. More than a century ago, 15 animals stepped off a train into these mountains. Their descendants still roam here today, a living link to what was almost lost. The story of the American buffalo is not a simple triumph. It's a story of destruction and partial recovery, of complicated motives and complicated people, of a species that survived and a people who nearly didn't. But it's also proof of something rare in history, that extinction is not inevitable, and what we choose to protect and when we choose to act still matters. And if you want to learn more about this incredible mountain range and how it formed, well, I made a video about that.